Well, we have a lot more terrifying things to discuss about AI. A lot has happened since the last time we spoke, Myke.
I don't presume that I'm the center of the universe, but there is an almost Truman Show-like aspect sometimes to life. And this is one of those things where I feel like, I was seeing enough about AIR around the place. Like, there was a reason that we spoke about it because it was coming into our worldview more and more.
Right.
But in the time between these last two episodes, I feel like it has taken over the world. I can't move for people talking about it. It's coming up on podcasts that have got nothing to do with this stuff, like not even tech-related shows they're talking about. Like Adina sent me a link to her one of her favorite podcasts. It's a podcast called Comic Lab, which is about cartooning and making comics. They did like a whole episode talking about it. And it makes sense for them a little bit because they are comic artists, right? They are artists.
Right.
But
they're
it's like,
afraid for
why
their future.
now?
Yeah, I think this is definitely the biggest Truman Show-like effect for anything that we have ever spoken about. And I think it's just that we happen to hit it at the exact right moment before a bunch of things exploded.
Yeah, it's like realistically, I know why this happened, but it's still such a strange feeling. This happened because like we spoke about it because it was starting to become a thing that we couldn't avoid, right? So that's why then it's just like a snowball effect.
Oh, I know. And like listeners may remember that I had a conference that I said I was going to go to in September. Yeah. As like, guess what? One of the major topics like everyone was discussing at the conference, it was a bunch of AI stuff. Like my whole life just exploded into this in the past month. And I think also with the last episode of the show, there was like a little bit of confusion over our positions because there's so much that this touches on, right? Like this, we just kind of talked about it off the cuff. And, I really think this absolutely touches on almost everything in the world. So I think to try to be clear, it's like with AI art and the language models in particular, in the short term, I think there's a lot of interesting discussions to be had about how it affects technology and how it affects the economy and how it affects ethics. But in the long term, we're seeing the beginning of the end of the human race.
Okie dokie. Is this the clarifying you were looking to do?
Yeah, just so people can understand where I'm coming from. There's lots of interesting discussions to be had where you can take many different positions, but ultimately, I think this all points in one direction, which is not very good. But yes, in the short term, since the last time we spoke, so much has happened. And I think one of the first things that you sent to me was that DALL-E is now open for the public to use.
Yep.
And the thing that I think really helped kick it off was, because last episode we were talking about how you need these like massive computing clusters to do this kind of stuff. I don't know. It was like 10 days after that episode went up, the very first desktop versions of these things came out, and the one I've been playing with is called Diffusion Bee, which allows you just on your Mac, as long as it's one of the new M processors so that it's fast enough, it allows you to start typing in whatever and generating AI art. And so it's like, oh, okay, this went from supercomputing clusters only down to it can happen on your desktop, which is, I think, the first time that lots of people actually started to play with it firsthand. And I think that's kind of what kicked off for lots of people. Oh, this is really real. Like I can play with it and I can see what it does. The first publicly used by us piece of AI art went up, which was running our Cortex logo through some AI art stuff.
How did you do that?
That was done with, what was it called? It was done with Dream, I think, is one of the projects, but you can upload a piece of art and have it like iterate on that piece of art.
Okay, that makes sense then. Because I wonder, it's like, how did you get it to do the Cortex logo?
This is also one of these things, like even Diffusion Bee, which is the thing that you can play with on your laptop. It started out as, you can only just put in words and then it will generate images. But even that one now, you can give it an image and then ask for modifications on that image. But the Dream program just lets you put in a piece of art and then it just iterates on it in some way. Part of the intrinsically horrifying thing about all of this art is that a bunch of examples had to be rejected because the AI knew that it was a brain And so ended up making it look very like, oh, it's a horrifying mass of meat that's
Nice.
also a brain.
My favorite.
Which brings us to AI art. Why you so terrifying? So last time we spoke, another one of these things was, oh, obviously this is coming for video. It's just a matter of time. It's just a question of how long does it take computationally to do these sorts of things. And it's like, oh, is that going to happen next year? No, it happened 2 weeks after the show went up. And I have something for you to take a look at, which was the first version of this, which is, this was made a little bit manually. It was made with Stable Diffusion. But the prompt is a journey through a boy's life. Again, this is not true video, but it's like an I don't know how to describe it. It's
like, I'm watching it now. It's like a flip book.
Yeah, it's a bit like a flip book. So just take a look at it and tell me what you think about this.
I mean, it's weird. Like, it's not much of a video to me, really. Like, I can see it's just like a bunch, you're just cycling through a bunch of images. It's got weird. I just got weirdly religious there for a minute. What is happening here? Like, what is going on here? Did an AI generate these and put them together, or like, what are they generating them from each other? Like, what is going on? How is this being made?
Yeah, so I read a little bit of what the author said, and the impression is he started with a general image that's called A Journey Through a Boy's Life, and then each of the next frames is based on the frame before it, given that same piece of information.
It's going in some really weird places. We just went to war for a while.
Yeah.
And now there's some kind of eldritch horror occurring. Like, okay, I mean, it's really weird. Like, I watched something like that and knowing where it's coming from, and it doesn't make me feel great in a way because of the weird places the AI takes itself. And there's like an uncomfortability in that. Like, I do not know why we spent a significant portion of that in various wartime. And no one can really answer that question. I assume there's no way to know why the AI went that route and stuck in it for quite some time.
So as a description for the listeners, it is, I think it's sort of horrifying, and it's like very dirty looking for some reason, but it is like a sequence of images that start with a child, and the child slowly grows up, and you just see a bunch of things like a kid at the desk doing his homework, and it sort of transitions. The kid just gets increasingly older and older, and then yes, it's young men at war for a while. And I presume this is one of these side effects of what's in the training database.
Yeah.
And it has some concept of, oh, based on all of the images I've seen, what has a boy been doing in his 20s? And so it generates like a ton of war imagery. I also suspect that's why at that moment it also gets weirdly religious, like a lot of crosses appear, because I presume that's coming from graveyard stuff. And it goes all the way through to ending with like a dead body laying on a table with sort of muddy blood coming down from it. This was the first thing that I saw that I thought, oh, this is a video. And I would also legitimately say, oh, this is a piece of art. Like you could display this in an art museum and it wouldn't be out of place. And what it made me think of was, I don't know if you've ever seen the animations from Pink Floyd's The Wall.
Yeah.
That's what this made me think of. Oh, it has that kind of feeling to it. And it has a really horrifying animation style. And I went back and wanted to rewatch some of the animation sections of that movie. And boy, it was an interesting experience because in comparison, suddenly the walls seemed remarkably undetailed. And I just felt like I could only see, oh, it's so simple. And like that is perhaps one of the most complicated examples of like hand-drawn animation is the wall. Oh God, compared to this,
oh yeah,
they just can't possibly put the detail in every single frame that exists in this one thing. And so I just had a real feeling of, wow, what a jump. It's sort of addressing the same idea, but in 100,000 times more detail. So anyway, that'll be in the show notes for people to take a look at. And then, I don't know, another 7 days after that, Meta and a few other companies announced true text to video projects. And I have some links in the show notes that you can click on. And so this is called Make a Video.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take a look at some of these links, I think this stuff looks more like what Stable Diffusion does.
Okay, this looks like take all of the generators and make them do animation, right? Like it has a similar look to, like, the quality of some of the imagery is like has the telltale signs of this was made by an AI art generator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the key characteristic of a lot of this stuff is it's still quite dreamlike because a lot of the details aren't there. There's a lot of areas where it's kind of fuzzy. But I think that this, again, is the thing where a lot of the detractors of this kind of thing said, oh, you'll never be able to do video. And you go, well, yeah, let's just wait and see how long this takes. And we go, okay, here we go. Here's the first versions of video where you can just type the words, a dog wearing a superhero outfit with a red cape flying through the sky. And it makes that, like, it makes a little video of that thing. And there's another video project, which I'll try to find for the show notes for viewers later, which was this, but it's like a multi-scene description. So you can say things like, a woman swimming in the ocean. She dives under the water and picks up a starfish on the ground and then returns to the shore. And it's able to keep that concept straight the entire time and construct the whole scene instead of just an image that's moving. So the speed on this in the space of 5 weeks has been absolutely breathtaking.
This all seems inevitable. I will say I am surprised at the speed, like you, right? Like that we have, from the last episode to now, how much has happened.
The thing that I just want to draw people's attention to that gets overlooked in the AI art discussion is people are talking about the art because it's visual. You can see it. I think it's the most understandable thing that's occurring. But to me, the much bigger deal is the less visible language model stuff. And so it is this same idea, but for words, where AI is responding to some text prompt with an answer of some kind. And we talked in Mortex about AI explaining jokes, like how an AI can explain a joke. Listeners can go check that out. But I have an example that I didn't mention that a listener pointed out from that paper that I had missed, which I think is much more impressive. So again, you can do this same thing. AI, does it understand words? And so I'm going to give an input, a thing that the user told the computer, and then the output, how the computer answered. So here is the input, and this is very strange. It's almost like a puzzle, just so you can understand what I'm saying here. Input. Michael is at that really famous museum in France, looking at its most famous painting. However, the artist who made this painting just makes Michael think of his favorite cartoon character from childhood. What was the country of origin of the thing that the cartoon character usually holds in his hand? So, do you think you have an answer to that question?
No.
Okay, here is what the AI said. The most famous painting in the Louvre is the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
The artist who made the Mona Lisa is Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci is also the name of the main character in the cartoon Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Leonardo da Vinci is from Italy. The thing that Leonardo usually holds in his hand is a katana. The country of origin of the katana is Japan. The answer is Japan.
Okie dokie.
Right?
I mean, part of my issue there is I forgot it was Leonardo da Vinci who made the Mona Lisa, but I would not have remembered that Leonardo the Turtle from Ninja Turtles held a katana because I thought that he had like a kendo stick or something. That is horrifying.
Right?
Because this is actually a good example, right? Because my human brain forgets things.
Mm-hmm.
The AI brain doesn't. It just has all the information or can get it, I assume. I don't know where from, but like the difference between pitching me against the machine there is I just couldn't remember a couple of key pieces of information, which now you tell me I did know them. So it's weird.
Yeah, or even when I first read this input, it's just phrased in such a strange and vague way.
Yeah, I do wonder why they did it that way. Like, that is odd to me.
I think the purpose of why it's framed in this really strange way is to give the minimal amount of information that you can regarding what the actual answer is. They don't even say like the most famous museum in France. It's a really famous museum in France.
I see. Yeah.
Right?
And also they're trying to get an answer, but they're asking a bunch of questions that require recalling the previous answer, right?
Right. It's a multi-stage thing to think through. I think the particular one that's really killer here is the artist who made this painting just makes Michael think of his favorite cartoon character from his childhood.
Yeah.
For the AI to make the connection, oh, it's Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo is one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Because there's no concept of how old the person is, right?
But yeah, there's no concept of how old the person is. Simply being able to draw that out of like, what painting in France would make someone think of a childhood cartoon? That's a crazy abstract thing to think of. But the machine got it. And so I think this like input output is an example of, again, the AI art stuff is interesting. The text stuff to me is where a lot of the much more concerning stuff comes from. And there's a little bit of a less visceral demo, but I actually found this the most striking thing I have found in language models, but it's a little bit hard to describe. So there's an article called Using GPT-3 to Pathfind in Random Graphs. GPT-3 is one of these language models. It's the most advanced one that people have access to. Although at the conference I was at, I got to see some of the not publicly released stuff, which was much more terrifying, but we'll just leave that alone for now.
So good. Love to hear it.
GPT-3 is the much older one. And this is the most impressive thing that I've seen. So this is a little bit hard to describe on a podcast, but there's this problem in mathematics, which is called the traveling salesman problem, which is say, oh, you're a salesman and you have to get to 10 cities in the United States. What's the shortest possible path to travel between those 10 cities in any order? And it's one of those things like it seems like it should be easy, but it turns out this is just incredibly difficult to actually solve in a reasonable way. Just a hugely computationally intense problem. So someone basically got the idea of, hey, why don't I see if GPT-3 can solve the traveling salesman problem? So I think you need to go read the paper to see the details, but let me just describe it in a general way, where the person gave an input to GPT-3 that says something like this. There's 17 locations. We need to find the shortest path between these locations. Location 1 is connected to locations 7 and 13. Location 13 is connected to locations 9 and 2. So they just wrote out like a bunch of, here's all of the connections. You're currently at location 3. Find the optimal path to location 8. And GPT-3 just did it. Basically, half of the time it was able to find an optimal or near optimal path, just given a bunch of random locations and the connections between them. And what's like, that may not sound like much, but what needs to be understood here, what is absolutely mind-blowing, is that GPT-3 has just been given a ton of like text documents from which to derive the world. And inside of it, somehow, it has the concept of locations and connections and what does it mean to try to find the path to a different location. Somehow it's thinking of what is the optimal solution. And again, like, it's not programmed for this. This is an incredibly difficult math problem, but it has an idea of what's going on. And so I've just seen more and more people are really trying to push the edges of these language models to say, what do you understand? And the answer keeps coming out to be much more than you might have imagined, that there's a better understanding of something in the world that has just been derived from dumping tons and tons of text files into this big database and building a neural network on top of it. It is genuinely terrifying. And I'll just say, like, I don't think I can talk in much detail about what I have seen, but I saw a couple demos of the next generation of this stuff in person, and it was extremely alarming what you could ask it to do, and it could give reasonable answers to. And I think just like the AI art stuff, it has clearly crossed into the realm of creative in a way that I think people just wouldn't have expected.
Like writing fiction?
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly the kind of thing. Some public similar projects that are easier to talk about there's a few cases of auto-generated text adventures. So exactly the thing that we do, right, for the bonus episodes in Cortex, where we work through a text adventure that someone has created. Mm-hmm. There are now projects that do that, where you can just play an infinite text adventure where it keeps spitting out like, oh, you're in this room and here are your options of what you can do. And if you select an option, like it'll just go forever in a coherent way. It's like, oh my. So yeah, I think the AI art stuff is flashy. The language model stuff is what people are going to be quite surprised at how much it might take over soon. And that includes a lot of things that people would not expect, like computer code. There are already some public examples of this, of you express in human language the computer code that you want created, and it is able to create that code for you. So we're rapidly encroaching on computers programming themselves territory.
They definitely want the computer to think for itself. That's what I'm looking for.
I mean, look, we can get to the Doom stuff later. Like, there's so much other stuff to talk about.
Wait a second. What do you mean later? Are we not already in it? I feel like we're in it. What are you talking about?
No, Myke. I don't think this is the Doom stuff at all. This is just timeline
Mere
stuff.
follow-up at this point.
Yeah, this is just, hey, what's happened since we last spoke? And a lot has happened since we last spoke. And this is why at the beginning I kind of divided, there's stuff in the near term and there's stuff in the long term. And we're still just in the near term conversation, Myke. Like, we're not even remotely close to the long term conversation.
Are we going to have that long term conversation?
Yeah, we will. But like, I think there's also just left over from last time. There's still just like a bunch of stuff in the near term that might be worth revisiting. One of the other things that came up last time is how do these models work? Like, how do they even begin to start creating anything, whether it's poetry or videos or computer codes? Like, how does this work? And fundamentally, these AI systems are made by just hoovering up a ton of information in the relative domain and feeding it into the system for the system to be trained upon. And I do think one of the most concerning short-term questions about that is like, what does it mean to use the public work that people have done, whatever that is? You've written a book and you've published it. You've gone on to Stack Overflow and you've helped answer hundreds of people's questions about computer code. You've been on DeviantArt for years and you've made images, and like that stuff has been sucked into a computer somewhere so that it can then produce imitations or produce new work based on what you have done. I think that is just a really difficult question.
Human inspiration. So one of the things that a lot of people brought up is, how is this any different to being inspired by someone's work and creating your own work? Now, I feel like it is quite different, but what do you think?
I think it's different, but it is hard to articulate why in a coherent way.
I feel like I have something that I think is pretty core to me, but I know a lot of people don't agree with it.
What is that?
The difference to me is the skill required in acting on the imitation is the thing that I actually think is valuable.
What do you mean by that sentence?
Let's imagine we'll go with painting. Right? It's just a simple thing that we can all understand, right? How somebody paints a picture. If you look at a painting, we'll talk about the previously famous Parisian art piece, the Mona Lisa, right? and you want to make your own Mona Lisa. To be able to take the inspiration from that piece and do it yourself, it is an imitation of previous work. But you had to do it. You had to practice and get the skill and build up your own level of skill to perform that work. Now, yes, all you have done is imitate it, but if you get even 50% close, you've made something that's interesting. You've now learned the skills that you can go out maybe and produce your own work, but you've built the actual skill, the practice. You've built the skill. That is what I think is the thing that concerns me most about this type of work, is that I worry that the skills will get lost. And I accept that some people do not value that the same as me, but that's where I come from with this, where I think that there is an inherent humanity in these mostly inconsequential skills that we value important as humans. Practices, traditions, all of this kind of stuff. I hold those kinds of things dear. And my concern with this, a lot of this stuff, is we may lose this part in larger numbers. Like, we may lose this part of our humanity to more people if the creation of art is so simple. Like, for example, I saw a comment on our YouTube video this morning, the one we put up. And this commenter had said that one of the things that they love about the idea of AI art is that there are movies that people want to exist that don't currently exist, and they would maybe in the future be able to type a prompt into an AI art generator, and it would create that movie for them to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I can't think of anything worse than that. Like,
why?
For me, because there's no art in there. There's no passion in there. There's no drive from a creator, from everyone involved in the creation of a movie to come together and work towards something good. Now, you may sit and think to yourself, Myke, I don't agree with what you're saying right now, and that is perfectly fine. But I just want people to understand, from my perspective, the creation of art is as important, if not more important, than the piece that is at the end. And I think if all we end up with is just a bunch of pieces at the end, we will lose so much of the humanity in this work. The ideas that somebody might have that sparks off something to create a different shot in this way. Like, that is what I actually hold to be so important to who we are as the human race, rather than just, here is media to consume. So, I don't know. I don't know if I'm expressing myself clearly, but I just want people to understand that, like, the thing that I care about is the creation of the art. And it's not even just about jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I just worry that we will lose this part of who we are. And, like, one of the things that makes us different to every other species on this planet is this kind of thing that we do. Sometimes for pleasure, mostly for pleasure. There is business in it, but people like to make things because they just like to make them. That's something I find to be so beautiful, and I don't get the same sense of pleasure out of typing 6 complex sentences into a text field to then look at an image. Maybe I'm old-fashioned.
If I'm trying to summarize your position, because I often have a hard time when people use language like, oh, it's a fundamental part of our humanity. Like, I'm never quite sure what that means, but I guess I'm trying to summarize your position as, like, you think it is just a fundamental good that humans are producing art, and that part of that process is the skills that are required to be learned in order to make that art.
I think that there is an importance in it. I can't tell you why, but it just feels, I don't know, there's a lot of emotion in it. And I just want people to understand that, like, I'm not sitting here of like, oh no, my job's gonna go away. Because realistically, It's not going to in my lifetime. I feel pretty confident about that. We'll get to why in a little bit. I have an example. I think we'll kind of like clear up why I'm not concerned about my own job. I'm concerned more about creativity as an idea, something that I care greatly about people being creative, even if it's just for fun. And I'm just not sure that I like this idea of creativity will just ultimately become the same thing, which is how good can you be at writing a prompt? Like, that doesn't feel creative to me. In the act of the act, the process doesn't feel like it exists to me in the same way anymore. I don't know.
I agree. I find it strange, this argument that the new artistry will be in creating the prompts. There's something, I don't know, there's something very odd to me about that argument. It kind of reminds me of a while ago when AI systems started becoming the best chess players in the world. There was this, what to me always seemed like an absolutely bizarre idea that the chess, there was, I forget what they called it, but it was this concept of like, oh, the best chess player will be a hybrid chess player, that it will be a person who is being advised by the computer. And there was a period in time where that was true, that a tag team of a human and a computer could beat the best computer and they could beat the best human. That always seemed to me like a strange artifact. Like, this won't exist forever. This just happens to be the situation right now, but I see no reason why the computers won't just ultimately outclass the human, and the human will just be like a monkey, right, adding absolutely nothing to this incredibly complicated game that's taking place. And it's not the best comparison, but I feel that there is something in this concept that people have of artistry will be the prompts that's the same.
If the computers are getting so good at text, at the same time that computers are getting so good of interpreting text to create art, why will they not just meet?
Yeah, maybe that's what it is it's like, why do you think you will be the best at coming up with the sequence of words that generates the most interesting art?
Yeah.
I just don't,
because it's similarly, like, if this is the same argument of like, oh, the computer will make better art than any human ever can, right? Like, that's kind of the thinking of like, oh, or just as good or good enough. Then why do you think computers won't be just as good as you are at creating prompts?
Yeah, maybe that's you've kind of sharpened it up there. I find that argument strange. And even if, let's say that for whatever reason it turned out that wasn't true, for it's built into the laws of the universe that humans are just great at writing prompts in ways that machines will never be, which I think is strange, but let's just say it was true. At least in my experience of playing around with Diffusion B, I agree with you. I don't think there was really anything creative about what I was doing.
It's problem solving. It's creative problem solving. But that's like a completely different thing to what I care about, which is the process of practicing and getting good at a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that that's really important. I think I'm going to do it again. I think it's part of the human experience. I do. And it doesn't need to be that everybody becomes a painter. But we all have these things in our lives that we practice and get better at.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, why don't I just give my game controller to a robot and then just watch what it does? Like, that's where we're going. It's like WALL-E, right? This is how we get to WALL-E. This is how WALL-E happens, that we're all just sitting in these chairs. Like, that's right now is the beginning of the path to WALL-E.
Well, WALL-E if we're lucky, but yes.
It's just like I feel like we have to do things. Whatever it is, some kind of thing that we enjoy the process of. And I feel like if all we're doing is saying that like this stuff is just going to replace filmmaking, it's just like, I don't want to watch those movies. I really don't, but I like there to be soul in something. I like to believe that a human was involved in the endeavors that I'm consuming. Like,
yeah.
But again, maybe I'm old-fashioned and I'm fine to accept that, but I'm just trying to get across like why these things are important to me, why I am so passionate about it.
Yeah, I sort of have a minor point and a major point on that topic. I think last time I made some offhanded remark of like very soon in major productions where we're going to see stuff that's AI generated and not know it. And I didn't realize at the time, but like, oh, that was already true.
Same.
Because
Didn't know about this.
Yeah. I had watched the Obi-Wan Kenobi show on Disney, and I didn't really think about it. But when I had watched Rogue One, I was very aware of listening to James Earl Jones do Darth Vader's lines of like, he's still Darth Vader, but he's getting too old for this. Like, you can just hear it in someone's voice that they're just older. That's just what happens as your vocal cords physically change. And when I watched Obi-Wan Kenobi, I never thought about it. And I also didn't think about the fact that I didn't think about it. And I realized since we recorded that episode, oh, I didn't think about it because all of his lines were done with AI. There's a program called Respeecher that will take a voice actor's lines and redo them in the voice of someone else. And what's really quite remarkable about it is it isn't just what you sort of think like voice modulators on the phone. Like, oh, I can increase or decrease my pitch, but it still sounds like me. Everybody has vocal tics and things. It's like, no. Respeecher will put in the vocal tics of the other person. Like, it's not just making your words sound in their voice. It's making them sound like them. Just as an interesting thing to note, though, I did go back on YouTube and I watched some of the original line deliveries of James Earl Jones in the original Star Wars. I was like, ooh, he is better here. Like, he has like funny little things that he does with a bunch of words that make those line deliveries really great. And there isn't as much of that in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show.
I will say, when I watched Obi-Wan, there was something about Darth Vader's performance that I didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed it was because James Earl Jones was getting older.
Right.
But it turned out it wasn't the case. But there was something that felt missing to me, and I just put it down to, and I remember saying to Adina at the time, I can't believe they're still getting this guy to do this. Why don't they just get like a voice actor?
Right. Leave James Earl Jones alone.
Yeah. Well, it was just kind of just like this isn't going to last forever with him.
Right.
So like they need a path, and they created one, and it did a fine job, but it still felt like it was missing something to me. I can't put my finger on what it was. It just didn't feel right. And I don't know if this was part, whatever. But what I will say, this particular implementation of AI, I'm fine with, because there are like practical reasons for it. Of like, if we want Darth Vader to sound the same, which I think ideally we do, right? Like, you could just get someone else to do it, but I would prefer it if he still sounded like James Earl Jones, because it's like an existing character. And James Earl Jones signed this away as an individual while still alive.
Right, which
said,
is key.
You can do this. You can take my voice and do whatever you want. Plus, working voice actors continue to get jobs being Darth Vader. Then they change the voice. For me, there are enough pieces of this puzzle where I'm like, I am fine with this because people are involved in it. It's if Disney just were like, we've just decided we don't want to hire him anymore, and we've created a thing, and we're just going to type some text in, and the AI is going to spit out the Darth Vader lines, I would be like, I don't like that. That doesn't feel good to me. But like the way they have done this whole thing going around, like, I'm kind of fine with. Like, in the same way that I do find it kind of funny, really, that they continue to have Mark Hamill on set during the Mandalorian stuff. To like be Luke Skywalker.
Right, but then they completely digitally replace him with the younger version of him.
Well, they do multiple things. They have him do a thing, then they have a lookalike actor do a thing, and then they put a digital recreation of his face on the young actor's face. We're kind of, really, there is no point in him being here, right? We just like to have him around. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But like, there is something funny to me about that, but at the same time, I'm like, at least it is a respect of the person they are digitally recreating. Everyone is in on this. That's fine.
Yeah.
You know?
I suspect that they're also using Respeecher to make Mark Hamill's voice sound like young Mark Hamill, because that's, again, like, he does not sound like he did when he was in his 20s.
But he also doesn't sound like him now either, right? So they're doing something.
Yeah, something is happening there. But this is also one of these key things of, like, okay, it's interesting to realize I had already watched an entire show where a major part of it was AI created, and I didn't even notice, or it didn't even cross my mind.
Yep.
But it also touches on, like, what you're saying here is some of the key differences between what's happening in different parts of the world. And a lot of the AI art developments on the internet are just like a crazy Wild West where people are just grabbing whatever they can. And it's like, that makes me extremely uncomfortable. Like, okay, so again, I will just say in general ways, I saw a demo of a Siri-like voice assistant that was significantly better than things that currently exist. Oh, it was very interesting, but it was also using the voice of a famous actress just in their demo mode. And I got very uncomfortable about that because it's like, she's a person who doesn't know that you've made a machine that can make her say anything.
Way! Hooray! That's
Right?
what we want.
Yeah, and it's like, no. And so a lot of the AI art stuff just feels like that. Like it's just grabbed everything that exists. And the thing that I keep thinking of is like it makes a marionette of everyone who's ever put out any kind of art in the public. Mm-hmm. And that's like a horror, right? That's just a completely horrifying concept that if you have a social media timeline where you've posted stuff, guess what? There's enough information where someone can make a marionette of you and it can do anything. And right now, like this can happen without someone's permission. And yeah, it's totally why like the Darth Vader stuff I have no problem with, because presumably James Earl Jones was like fantastic.
I saw an article with that. That was like I read about that. It was the case that he had approved this, signed the rights. Like he's good with it.
There's a big distinction between giving permission for something like this to be done and just the power of AI to make a marionette of anyone. And there's something really horrifying about that. Now, I think it becomes like other people brought this up as a kind of question. There's a boundary that's crossed between doing it to a living person, which is super bad. It's like, yeah, I just think that's really awful and immoral. It's less bad when the person's dead, but it can still be bad if it's recent. I don't quite know what recent means in this context, but clearly when we get to a point where we're talking about modifying Leonardo da Vinci's art, I don't think there's anything bad there about like making a marionette of Leonardo da Vinci, making a machine that can spit out a ton of Leonardo da Vinci style paintings.
I don't think it's possible to ascribe some kind of rule onto this. You just feel it when you feel it. Like, I can't tell you what the right time period is, and it's also different in every case, and, you know, it goes on and on forever. Like the Fast and Furious movie, right? Where Paul Walker had just died, right? And it was like months later when the movie came out, but they used some digital recreation of his face to be able to give him like a tribute and send-off. And I think that there is a little, like, it's awkward. I think that movie came out too soon, really. But the whole family kind of seemed to agree. And there's something about, like, that was the thing. Same as, like, Princess Leia, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like
that's
Princess
what I was
Leia's send-off was the next one after Carrie Fisher had died. Where it's like, still, I feel like we're on a fine line here because it's weird.
Mm-hmm.
But it was recreated from stuff that she did participate in shooting. And at least there's, like, a tribute. But then if like Princess Leia just continued being a character after that, I'd be like, no, you pushed it too far now, right? Because now that's the making of the marionette, right? Like she's dead now, but you're continuing to use her. That would be weird. It's like I don't think it's possible to put rules on like the death of a person. I just know that I don't find it particularly comfortable for someone to profit off either financially or publicity-wise, somebody who is dead. Like taking their actual work and again, divorcing the work required in the copying, right? And just straight up, like, I took this thing and I made this thing out of it. Like, and I didn't really have to do anything other than put this image into the AI. There's an uncomfortableness for me in that.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that there's a like with many discussions, you can run into areas where there's some kind of spectrum.
Yeah, like someone taking the works of Shakespeare and putting that into an AI and making more Shakespeare, I don't care about that. But I can't tell you why I don't care about it either. I just don't.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to also add that this dances around a concept that I've been thinking about for years, and I have a hard time articulating. But for now, I will just call it as the importance of saying no in art. And I think a lot of artistic projects or the life of creative people are defined as much by what they did as what they didn't do.
1,000 no's for every yes.
Yeah, there is a way to put it, but I think that having spoken to creative people, a lot of them have some internal set of things that they don't do that's not obvious in the work that they create, but it lends a kind of character to their work. I've also just recently went through this where I killed what was going to probably be like a 20 or 30 minute video that was all storyboarded and written out.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I killed it is because I realized this was a project to say no to, that like, yes, I could put it out and I think people would like it, but it violated a couple of my own internal, like, I don't want to do this sort of thing in this way, even if no one in the audience would have noticed. I was like, man, that was a hard decision, but I think that's what matters. And so even while I think that there's nothing morally wrong about making new Shakespeare plays or new Leonardo da Vinci paintings with AI, I do think that there's something about this concept of making an artist do anything that you want demeans the limits that person put on their own things.
And I'm also like not sure why you even want it.
Well, I think this is also just a side effect of how easy it can be and will be to create this stuff.
Yeah.
Where just like out of curiosity, you type some prompts in. I guess
Curiosity is different though, right?
But I mean is like when this gets good enough that it can just like make a movie where some things happen. I don't know. This idea of the importance of saying no is also connected to a thing that I see with a lot of particularly TV shows and long running creative projects, where I think of this as you can see the audience influence the creators.
Yeah.
That never works. And there's lots of shows where it's like, oh, this is the moment. I can see now that the creators are aware of the audience. And with creative projects, the audience will ask for things that they want that they don't realize in the long run actually destroys or makes worse the thing that they want. And like that sort of, I think that can sound super snobbish, but I think it's true. And I've seen it in enough projects where it's like the audience wants something and the creator then goes, oh, I'll do that thing. And the audience responds. And you get into this little positive feedback loop of doing the things that the audience wants. And none of those decisions mattered individually, but cumulatively, they can make a thing much worse in a way that's hard to pin down. And I just think there's something in AI art where even when there's no problem, I think people can like destroy the things that they love because there's no one to say no. There's no creator who says, these are the limits of my thing. And again, I keep thinking of the Miyazaki movies as a particular example of this. Like if you can make a Miyazaki movie about anything you want, it kind of destroys what those movies are. I'm less moved by the argument about it's important for humans to do these sorts of things, but I can easily imagine a situation where even if the AI is able to make amazing art, it's actually kind of worse for everyone involved, even though it's a thing that the audience has asked for, or that people go like, oh man, like I wish I could continue the series of movies forever, and I can do it by typing into the machine and it will make the movie for me. It's like, you'll ruin the thing you love by doing that, by getting what you want all the time without a creative mind to say like, no, this is the limits of this project, or no, like this is when the story stopped.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that statement. Like, and we've spoken about this a lot, right? Like that idea of the point where the artist becomes aware of the audience. We speak about this a lot in regards to like just personally TV show recommendations. And like, like I know you are very sensitive to this. Like it's something that I'm familiar with. Like you point this out and I'm like, oh, okay, that's an interesting idea for why the show may have gotten bad in that season. Like it's not really something I would have thought of. And I will say that I mostly agree with your thinking here, but not completely. I think my kind of interpretation of this idea that you have is like just to add the word like mostly to it.
Yeah.
Right? Like that I don't, and I'm not saying that you say this, but the way that it sounds makes it sound like a definitive, like that listening to the audience or seeing what the audience want can never make something better. But I don't think it's that way, and I'm not sure you think it's that way, but I just want to state that, right? Where like
yeah.
In our work, there is definitely feedback which helps make something better, and I do this all the time. But sometimes people will ask for me to talk about a thing, and I just know it won't be interesting because I'm not that person to do that, right? And that tends to be a lot of it for me of like, you're telling me you want a thing, I know you won't want it because I know it's not going to be interesting because either I don't find it interesting or I don't have the knowledge or whatever it might be, like that there is that part of the artist of, oh God, I just called myself an artist. There is that part of the creative person
right,
where they are aware of what they're good at and what they're not and what they think will be ultimately enjoyable for this type of stuff that they create.
Yeah.
And then they go out and make it.
Obviously, like this is a different kind of thing. I also think it's the bounds of the project. And I just recently stumbled upon, to me, what is just the most perfect example of the artist saying no, which is also a little bit heartbreaking for reasons that will be obvious when I mention who it is. J.R.R. Tolkien. I just discovered, I can't believe I never knew this. He started a book that was set after The Lord of the Rings. And so he wrote the first couple of chapters of this story. And it's quite interesting, but like he then wrote in one of his letters, you can get these books of all of his private letters where he discusses a bunch of his thoughts. He wrote about why he didn't finish this. And the reason he didn't finish it is because, in his timeline after The Lord of the Rings, like there's not really much magic left in the world. He had an idea of who the story would be about, but basically magic is gone and it's just the world of men. And he said like, I could have written a totally fine adventure book, but that's not what the world I was trying to create was about. Like he was trying to create this mythology. And writing another story that's what happens after the mythology, he was like, wait, why am I doing this project? This isn't really what I want to do. Sure, we can continue what happens with a bunch of these characters, but I'm going to say no. And so he just like stopped writing it and said, no, I'm not going to write anymore. The stories of what happens after. I'll just fill in some of the details of what happened before. And I think that's an amazing example. And reading his letter about it, he's just very self-aware. Sure, the audience would love this. Everybody's asking for like a sequel to Lord of the Rings because it was so great. But it's also so great because he knew where to stop. I just think that's an interesting example. And it would just make me very sad if people were typing into AI generator machines like, give me Tolkien's next book. Like, oh no, please don't. Please don't do that. It's bad. Hey, do you want to talk about this podcast that you found here, Myke?
So I referenced why I'm not worried about my job specifically.
Mm-hmm.
This has been going around a lot. It is an AI Steve Jobs on an AI Joe Rogan episode.
Uh-huh.
And it is a full podcast created by an AI. I've not really bothered to look into this because I actually think it might be part of a publicity stunt. But nevertheless, It is a thing that exists. It's 20 minutes long, and you can listen to it, and I've, like, skipped around in it. And you know what? It really sounds like Steve Jobs. Like, there are points where you can hear that it's not real, right? But, like, and ultimately, my takeaway from this is, who wants this? Like, genuinely, like, who wants this? Who wants to hear what Steve Jobs might have said to a fake Joe Rogan? And for me, like, I don't feel concerned about my job because, all right, you can take a version of me and a version of you, and we can have them make podcasts forever. But I kind of feel like if that's what you want, I don't know how much you could enjoy the content because it's not real. It's not real conversations. That's what I do for a living, is real conversations between real people about things that they care about. And my assumption is the majority of people that listen to my shows want to hear that rather than let's imagine what two AI might be talking about instead. For me, that's just so broken from what I imagine people want the content for. And look, if you are that person, you don't need to tell me. Of course I know you exist, right? Like, I'm sure that there are people that would like to just have us on in the background so they could go to sleep, and it's just like we're just going to have an infinite amount of episodes forever. But realistically, I don't imagine that that's going to be a thing that people would genuinely care about enough in the way that people might care about the content that I make. So just coming across this one episode, it honestly made me, even though it showed me it can be done, it made me feel more secure in my own profession. But honestly, in the last episode, I wasn't worrying about my own profession. It was more about the idea of creativity in people. That's what I care more about.
You sent this to me, and I took a listen. I did the same thing. I didn't listen to the whole thing all the way through. I sort of skipped around. I have a slightly different take on this sort of stuff, which is it doesn't matter how good Steve Jobs on Joe Rogan is to listen to. It's more of just a demonstration of proof of concept of this thing is possible. And once you have a demonstration of proof of concept, guess what? Things only get better. They don't get worse.
Yeah.
So this was just like the first real proof of concept demonstration of two people having a podcast conversation. I do have to say, listening to it, I think the Steve Jobs was less good, but like holy moly, did it nail Joe Rogan's way of talking.
Well, that makes sense though, right? The amount of source material for Joe Rogan is almost infinite, really.
Yeah, I just thought like it's actually interesting to listen to because you can almost hear the fact that there's 100 million hours of Joe Rogan talking, and you know the database for Steve Jobs is so much smaller, and you can hear that in the two voices. Is like, especially because I think Rogan has a funny circular way of talking sometimes that it's like, I would never not know that wasn't him. If you told me, oh, it was Rogan, but it was only just an AI Jobs, I would have believed it. But this to me is again, a good example of this thing where making a marionette of someone is just bad. It's like, hey guys, whatever you think of Rogan, he's still a person, and it's real bad to make like a fake show where he's talking. And it's less bad for Steve Jobs because he is dead, but it's still close enough that it makes me very uncomfortable. I just think we're going to see an increasingly large number of these sorts of things where people can make whatever they want, and it's only going to become increasingly easy over time. And I don't know how this project was made in particular, but yeah, it's the first example of, oh, it's an AI podcast with two people where we have enough information to recreate them in some sense.
Yeah, it's a publicity stunt for the company. The company that made this has an AI text-to-voice generation system that they are trying to sell.
Yeah, I mean, that's not surprising.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting just how fast so much of this is being commercialized.
Yeah.
I stumbled across I thought, oh God, like how brutal is this? But it's a company that makes AI people who will read quite convincingly scripts where it looks like it's a talking head segment. And the whole idea is, oh, you can have all of your corporate training material delivered in this way, where there's like an AI person who will talk through whatever it is you need to onboard your new employees. There's something about that to me, which is like, it's very convincing, but it also feels like what a horrible dystopian nightmare. Where it's like you as an employee sign up with the company is like, oh, hey, we didn't even take the time to film a person going through our own training materials. We just gave it to an AI, and they made a fake person who you get to listen to explain your job to you.
Enjoy your training.
I know. It's just so awful.
We value you. I just want to read from the podcast AI, that kind of description of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're a machine learning enthusiast, just want to hear your favorite topics covered in a new way, or even just want to listen to voices from the past brought back to life, this is the podcast for you.
Right.
All right.
Do you want to hear our ghoulish marionettes say what we made them say?
But it's just like, if you are a fan of Steve Jobs, which I think is who they are pitching this to, right? why do you want to hear him talk about things he never spoke about? Like, what do you value from that other than just like hearing the voice? Like, if you just want to hear his voice, just go to YouTube and watch like commencement speeches or interviews or whatever. Like, I don't understand why you want to hear him talk about things he never spoke about. It's not his opinion. There is no opinion of him in this. They've built all of this from things he said, but you're just taking words he used and just putting them together in a new way. It's not actually his opinion. And I find it so strange.
Since the last episode, I have much more strongly onboarded the concept of try to only read and consume and listen to and watch media that you know has been produced by a human.
Yeah, and how did that do for you with Obi-Wan? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it sneaks in there, but at least it's like, oh, I know humans made the show.
Sure. But yeah, at least you got that part, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not all humans, all of it, all the time, but like enough.
Yeah. And so again, like this idea that went from like, that's crazy to, oh, I guess this is wise advice to live by has accelerated quite quickly in my life. Yeah. And yeah, it's kind of a weird, make sure you know it's a person who wrote or made this thing. So yeah, I am trying to onboard that as a concept, because I think not onboarding that as a concept is part of what is going to lead to AI doom for us all.
Oh God, we still want to talk about AI. All right, yep, okay.
Yes, I do want to talk about doom for us all, but partly because it's clearing up a little bit of confusion from last time as well.
Okay.
So one of the things we discussed last time was Stable Diffusion making images like, here is the filming of NASA landing on the moon and creating fake stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think a totally fair criticism of that I saw from people is, hey, Photoshop exists, like we can make those images now. Yep. We don't need an AI art system to generate them for us. If you would be convinced by a good Photoshop, what's the difference from being convinced by an AI art system about something that isn't real in the world? So what I want to portray here is I think doom comes in like 3 phases. Phase 1, I think, will be just pollution of the public information space. And I think it's sort of a general confusion. And what makes the difference between AI art and something like Photoshop is the scale and the cost. So right now, if someone wants to try and put out a bunch of misinformation or create evidence to back a conspiracy theory, there still needs to be effort that goes into creating that thing. Like you were saying, Myke, you need to learn these skills as part of your art for how to create a piece of misinformation to put out in the world. And I think what I kind of expect if I'm projecting a bunch of this stuff forward is the scale of this potential misleading images and misleading text that were AI generated is just vastly beyond what we can imagine now. And I think in the modern world, like a lot of people have been driven kind of crazy just from the selection of what information they're presented. Like, people on social media can kind of like drive themselves crazy by just going down rabbit holes and being continually presented with information that agrees with them. And that's just by like selecting the things that they're seeing that actual human beings have created. But what I'm kind of thinking might happen here is that when you're able to generate a huge amount of content, just as right now, companies intentionally A/B test what they show you for engagement. Not even on purpose, but AI-generated content will effectively be unintentionally A/B tested for convincingness. How convincing is this sequence of words in whatever idea it's trying to spread? And I really do view a lot of this stuff as the kind of concept of memes, of ideas. They evolve, and they spread, and they mutate, and their spreading in the world doesn't have anything to do with how true they are. It has to do with how convincing they are.
Imagine hooking up Twitter's algorithm to a text AI.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen.
That every time you pull to refresh, it just gives you a bunch of other nonsense.
Mhm.
That is truly horrifying to me as a thought.
I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see that, or we're going to see something very much like it. I mean, look, the AI video stuff that we saw before, do you think TikTok won't start doing that the moment that it becomes engaging to people?
That's a really good point. That's actually the most likely of all of them, I think, to occur.
Yeah. To just automatically generate 20-second, 30-second videos every time a person refreshes and just keep doing it for whatever keeps that person engaged. I think we're going to see that. Even if it's not the companies directly doing it themselves, you'll have entities on Twitter where it's like, oh, it's a bot, but it's, it's acting like it's a person and it's just existing in the world and it's doing this kind of unintentional A/B testing for convincingness. And the ones that are more convincing for whatever reason will just spread better. So I really think that is a kind of like, I think a lot of the criticism is people want to know like, Gray, like you love technology. Why aren't you behind this stuff? I used to be a real technological optimist, but I've changed my mind on a bunch of that stuff. And this is one area in particular where, and I want to be clear here, I don't think it's malicious. I don't think it's necessarily that someone's out there trying to do bad, but I think the ability to create hundreds of millions of memes in the way of like just a concept that can spread at the drop of a hat is just bad for the public information space. And the world has barely survived social media in some ways. Like that has made stuff so bad with how people think about the world. And this is that just taken to the next level by a huge order of magnitude. So I suspect that'll be one of the first ways that this becomes obviously bad over time, like once it progresses out of the stage of just being an interesting toy. My hope is that for whatever reason, we're in the part of the technological development where it looks like it's an exponential graph, but it's rapidly going to level off at an S curve. And we discover, oh, there's parts of this that were way harder than we thought. That's where I hope this is going, but
you show me the signs of that one on the next episode then.
Well, I'm in this position where I feel a little bit like, oh, I'm like a crazy person talking into a microphone about this stuff. But I have spoken to some of the top people in the world in this area, and they're very concerned is the way that I would put it. Mm-hmm. And talking to people, I was trying to tease out this concept of, where do we think we are on this curve? Is this the start of the exponential, or are there obvious problems ahead? And the answer was pretty universally, as far as we can tell, the exponential has barely begun, because part of the reason it's making such fast progress is because the work being done right now is still in the realm of, oh, hey, you get into work and like, what's the first thing you think of that could make this better? And you try it and it makes it better. That's just like an indication that we're at the start of an exponential curve. So yeah, I think we're going to have like a bunch of confusion about this stuff. I think that transitions into genuine economic problems as particularly language models get better and better and better at doing all the kinds of work that humans do, which is largely knowledge work. And it's funny, like I made Humans Need Not Apply 8 years ago now, I think. And it's been on the back of my mind about, revisiting that at some point. And I was kind of thinking like, oh, I don't know how relevant this video still is. But having rewatched it is like, oh no, I put it back like to be featured on my channel under one of like the most watched videos, because it's like, no, all this AI stuff and all of the language stuff like makes this way more concerning. I think the lesson learned there has simply been that physical automation is slower to progress for a bunch of reasons, but all of the knowledge worker stuff is coming along very, very fast. I just know that there are companies that are very explicitly targeting low-level knowledge work and then will be progressing further and further up the chain as fast as they can with better and better language models to do all sorts of things that people can do. I understand that lots of people just fundamentally disagree with me on this point of economics, that jobs can't be replaced because humans have infinite needs and always want more things. I understand that argument. I just don't agree with it. And I think AI just breaks some of the fundamental assumptions that are built into that model of, as we get better machines of all kinds, we just increase the quality of life and increase our desires. Like, I just don't think that that's universally true. So yeah, I think we're going to end up with some really major problems in the economy, particularly in the knowledge worker part of that economy. And look, we don't need to talk about it today because we've talked about it enough. But I think once you start encroaching on AI systems that are good enough to replace most human work, you really start encroaching on the kinds of things that can lead to the extinction of the human race. Maybe that's a little too heavy for today, but that's kind of my having thought it through of like, what are the three phases of where does this go? It's confusion of the public information space, destruction of the economy, extinction of the species. It's 1, 2, 3.